Out front next, the breaking news, not repeating the bleep show. New reporting tonight about what Trump is telling confidants he will not do in CNN's debate 2 days from now. This is we learn about one of the comebacks Biden is gearing up to deliver. Also breaking, polls about to close in the most expensive Democratic primary ever. The biggest progressive names out in full force. AOC, Sanders, Warren. Is it enough to save Jamal Bowman? And Barack Obama's half-sister tear-gassed live on CNN. What happened? We're on the ground there. Let's go out front. Tonight, breaking news, final votes being cast at this moment in the most expensive House primary race ever. Here's what's at stake. Progressive New York Congressman Jamal Bowman could be just hours away from losing his seat. And if that happens, he will be the first member of the so-called squad, the group of 9 of the most left-leaning members of the House, to be booted from Congress. And many big-name progressives, Senators Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, have been pounding the table and showing up for Bowman. I want to go to Miguel Marquez, who is outside Jamal Bowman's headquarters right now. Final votes coming in, and we're going to get the results and see what happened here. It could be crucial for November. Miguel, what are you hearing as polls are getting ready to close?
Well, look, we got about an hour and a half left, and everything we have heard, whether it's the polls or the voters that we've talked to over the last several days, or even being at a polling station today. We were in Mount Vernon all day, to City Hall. That should be a very, very strong Bowman precinct. And from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., when we left to come over here, we asked them how many voters all day they had. How many do you think? 19. That was the entirety of the voters that went to that one precinct.
Are you serious?
Not very busy. It should be. I am absolutely serious. I was shocked. We kept going up there to talk to these folks. So it was shocking that they only had. Now, these are all very small precincts as well. So there's not a lot of voters in those precincts, but you'd expect a much better show for Bowman in a place like that. The energy. Look, Bowman came to this district and rode the energy and the anger over the justice rights and George Floyd protests and the justice movement into office. He beat Eliot Engel, who had been there for many, many years. And now those tides have turned. Yes, there was a lot of money from AIPAC, Super PAC that is in this race, but those messages are resonating. It's a fairly small Jewish population in the district, about 7%, but that message is resonating. The people who are most angry in this election, and it's a fairly small number that come out for these Democratic primaries, they are the ones that are coming out, and it doesn't look particularly good for Jamal Bowman. Erin?
All right, Miguel, thank you very much. That's really, I know a small precinct, but 19 voters, I'm sorry, I'm just floored. It says a lot about just issues around this country. All right, out front now, former Democratic Congressman from New York, director of the Cornell Institute of Politics and Global Affairs, Steve Israel, and Eric Erickson. He is host of the Eric Erickson Show and author of You Shall Be as Gods. So, Steve, you're from New York. You ran the re-election arm of the House, so you know this district very well. I know the precincts are small. I'm sorry. I'm just still stunned by 19 people actually caring enough to go out. What does this mean?
Well, first of all, 19 votes means that Congressman Bowman is drastically underperforming. Now, New Yorkers are pretty well known for commuting to New York City and voting on their way home. So that number will come up, but it still reflects a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of energy for Congressman Bowman. Look, there are 2 competitive Democratic primaries in downstate New York, both in the suburbs. Jamal Bowman versus County Executive George Latimer in Westchester, and your former CNN colleague, John Avlon, running against Nancy Goroff in Eastern Long Island.
And that also, we'll see if John wins tonight as well.
Both of these races will test this proposition. Do Democratic voters want purity and ideology on the left, or do they want pragmatism and winnability near the center?
Right. And
both of those races will test that proposition.
Avlon, obviously, about pragmatism and getting it done, and Latimer has been running on that. So, Eric, Bowman has been vocal in the Israel-Gaza war, and you just heard Miguel talk about that, the relevance of that in this race, and it has been. Bowman voted against military aid to Israel. He's described the Israeli invasion in Gaza as genocide. Here are some of the things he said.
There's still no evidence of beheaded babies or raped women.
75 years of military occupation.
We are going to show AIPAC the power of the South Bronx.
Eric, what will it say if Democrats in New York resoundingly reject that message in 90 minutes?
I think it says very strongly that you don't have to be for Israel per se, but to be hostily against it and to have the same rhetoric as not the people who are anti-Israel, but anti-Semites in this country is a bridge too far for a lot of people. Jamal Bowman got his seat running in 2020 against the incumbent chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, saying he was too in the pocket of the Israel lobby in Washington. And I think he might have misread his election in 2020 and overplayed his hand here. People really don't like that rhetoric, particularly given the horrible anti-Semitism coast to coast in this country on both sides of the aisle right now.
So just talk about what this means, though, Steve, for November and for Biden and for Democrats, for enthusiasm. If Bowman loses tonight, that's the first member of the squad to lose in Congress, right? The squad that had become quite, powerful for a period of time. And here's the messaging and some of the most well-known faces of that group.
Suburbs have essentially already begun pursuing a defunding of the police.
Not on my watch. Will I not be able to humanize the impact and push back against corporate greed?
When you say I'm anti-woke, when you talk about wokeness, you're saying I'm anti-Black.
What does Bowman's loss, if that's what we see tonight, mean for that movement, that group, right? The far left wing of your party?
Well, they're going to need to reassess if Bowman loses, if the progressive candidate in New York 1 loses. They do need to reassess. But look, every race has its own dynamic. I chaired the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. No race reflects everything. They're going to say, well, it was $25 million against him. He never had a chance. But they really need to ask this question. Every district has its own dynamic, its own center of opinion. Does it make sense to have such a purely progressive message in electorates that prefer the center?
Right. And so, Eric, okay, now on the other side, Lauren Boebert, she has a primary tonight. And she may indeed be victorious. It's a six-way race in Colorado. Those polls closing soon. She barely won her seat last time, barely won it, switched districts after the video surfaced of her vaping and allegedly groping at a musical. So she switched districts. Is it possible she wins again? And with all this, it's just keep going?
It is possible that she wins tonight. And this gets to the point on Bowman as well, that there are fits and bad fits for districts. And to win, you need to be a fit for your district. And if she can win in this district, she was redistricted and had to move, then politically she probably played her hand right than being where she was. But there are ideological alignments in hard Republican and hard Democratic districts, and you need to know your district. You can only deviate from your district so far before they throw you out of office.
Steve, what does this mean, do you think, for Biden? If you do see a rejection tonight of the progressive candidates in New York, what's the message for him?
Well, exactly what was just said. You need to have House Democratic candidates who are fits for their media markets, fits for their district. Joe Biden has an entire career of trying to govern from the center. He has tried to satisfy progressives and to a great extent has done so. But I want to say this. The New York 16 race with Bowman, it's a Democratic district. That's not going to go to a Republican. New York 1 remains to be seen. I do think it tells a story about what's happening in suburbs. So in the 7 battleground states that Joe Biden must win, this election is in the suburbs.
And Eric, you agree with that, bottom line?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the suburbs are where it's going to be fought and won.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
And next, Obama's sister tear gas live while on CNN as she spoke out amid deadly protests. What happened? We're going to show you what we saw. And Trump not backing down on his claims Biden will be drugged up at CNN's debate, a claim he's been pushing for years.
They give him a big fat shot in the ass and he comes out. And for 2 hours, he's better than ever before.
It's primary night in 4 states tonight: Utah, Colorado, South Carolina, and New York. Non-presidential races only, but several are getting national attention. In Colorado, Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is running in a different district than the one she currently represents. And in New York City's northern suburb, Democratic Congressman Jamal Bowman is facing a challenge from a more centrist Democrat in what has become both the most expensive congressional primary ever and a fight over the party's position on the Israel-Hamas conflict. Polls closed at the top of the hour. CNN's Miguel Marquez is outside Bowman headquarters for us tonight. So what's the mood there like tonight?
Very quiet so far, but typically on election night it is. We still have about 45 minutes to go before the polls close here. But look, I think Bowman does face an uphill battle. All the voters that we have spoken to, the real anger is not so much on his views about Israel, because even a lot of American Jews are upset by what's happening in Gaza, but it was his take. It was the way that he, called it 75 years of occupation, a genocide, and that he sort of apologized but sort of didn't. And I think that has taken a toll. 4 years ago, he came to power in this same district, riding on that wave of anger over the racial justice movement and George Floyd and everything that was happening in our country at that time. Now that tide seems to have turned against him. Look, there's a lot of money in this race. $25 million, about $15 million of it AIPAC is spending through its super PAC. The airwaves here have been saturated with commercials that are anti-Bowman. The mailers have gone out. People are just talking about 10 or 12 of them arriving in their mailbox every day. So it has been a lot of money shoved into a very small race. Anderson?
And what have you been hearing from voters, and what's turnout been like?
Yeah, and I should say that the Bowman's campaign and others are very, very upset at the way this outside money has come into here. But the voters, we've seen campaigns where a lot of money is spent and still it doesn't break through. Voters here are very, very upset. The ones that are most upset are the moderates, Jewish voters. About 7% of the district is Jewish, but a lot of voters are upset with the way that he's gone after Israel. We were at Mount Vernon today at the City Hall. That should be a very big Bowman district and a precinct. We were from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. when we left to come over here. How many voters do you think voted in that precinct? 19. That number should be a lot bigger, and that should be very worrying for Jamal Bowman tonight.
Yeah.
Anderson?
Miguel Marquez, thank you so much. Perfecto now, CNN's political commentator Van Jones. So if Bowman loses, what does that say?
Well, I mean, it would suggest that, at least in that district, the tone of how you deal with the Israel-Palestine conflict is important. Look, a lot of people are concerned about what's happening in Gaza. A lot of people don't like those images, but it's how you deal with it. And I think AIPAC has decided they want to make an example of them, so money matters. But I think also you got to represent your own district. And you have a very big Jewish district that felt, apparently, that this was not the way they want the issue handled.
What does this say about the sort of the dispute between the establishment wing, the left wing of the party?
Well, listen,
not just in this race, but sort of writ
large.
Well,
I mean, but part of it is this issue does split the Democratic Party because there are two values that people who are Democrats hold, and they're in conflict with each other. One is you do want to defend Israel, especially from Islamic terror and that kind of stuff, Hamas being a terrorist organization. You don't want terrorists killing people, especially killing children at festivals. So that's the value. But the other value is human rights for Palestinians. You don't want unarmed civilians being killed in large numbers. And so you have a party, this is not just an easy thing, you have a party that's being split down the middle in terms of the seams of what our values are. And so what you need in a situation like that is sober leadership. I think Biden has been trying to show that leadership, even though people on both sides are very, very upset about the side that they're on within our party.
The money that's been spent on this race is
unbelievable. Well, listen, and that's the challenge because AIPAC has to be careful here. Because on the one hand, they want to make an example out of somebody, but at the same time, you can win the battle and lose the war long term. If you start mass manufacturing martyrs, I was trying to stand up for a cause I believed in, and I got gunned down by AIPAC. Then you might win that battle, but long term, the brand of AIPAC may be this is a bullying organization. This is a vicious organization. And then that becomes something bad for the long term. And also, just picking off individual Congress people doesn't necessarily move public opinion in the right direction on Israel. So the long-term public opinion war could be harmed if there are too many of these kind of heavy-handed attacks.
Interesting. Van Jones, thanks very much. We'll see what happens. Coming up, a third day of hearings in the Mar-a-Lago documents case wrapped up a short time ago. What the judge had to say about arguments by the Trump team attempting to suppress boxes of evidence seized by the FBI. That's next.
Polls
closing in New York just about 20 minutes ago, and right now votes are being counted in what is the most expensive House primary in United States history. It has pitted two Democrats against each other. Progressive Squad member Congressman Jamal Bowman against the Westchester County Executive George Latimer, who is a moderate and veteran politician that you saw here last night. Here, look at the votes that are coming in right now. We've got about 36% of the vote in so far, so obviously still some more counting to go. But right now, George Latimer is about 56.5%, Jamal Bowman at 43.5%. And Harry Enton, CNN's senior data political reporter, is here to break it all down. Harry, I mean, you see those numbers, but also look at this visual of the two watch parties, for these two candidates right here. It's kind of a striking visual to see Latimer's party on the left and Bowman's on the right, which is, pretty sparse, judging on what we're seeing at 9:23 p.m.
Yeah, one of those looks like a party in which people expect to win, and that's on your left side of your screen, George Latimer. On your right side of the screen, not exactly the party that looks like they're expecting to celebrate this evening, which, of course, matches up with the poll results that we see so far, which is that George Latimer has an advantage in this race.
Yeah, I mean, how could that change as what we're seeing being counted in? We had Mr. Latimer here on the show last night. We were talking to his team about when they expect most of the vote totals to come in. Obviously, they're looking at Westchester County and other parts of this.
Yeah, so not much of a surprise to you. I was looking at the votes that have come in so far. This district is partially Westchester, partially the Bronx. Westchester makes up a larger share of it, and that's where Latimer's base is. The Bronx is where Bowman's base is. Much more of the Bronx has been counted so far as a percentage of the vote that's come in. There is much more of Westchester to come. I will note that Latimer was expected to do extremely well in the early vote. He has done so well in the early vote so far, winning it by over 2-1. But even in the day of election vote that's coming in, Latimer is still winning it by about 15, 16 percentage points. And there's still a lot of that vote to be counted. So, yeah, things could change. But at this particular point, if you have a lead like George Latimer has and you look at the vote that's outstanding, you'd much rather be him than Jamal Bowman.
Well, and we talked about with him last night, I say this has been one of the most expensive primary races in House history. AIPAC is responsible for a lot of that. I think it was at $14.5 million that they used to back Latimer. But those ads weren't all about Israel. Some of them didn't mention Israel at all. But they made clear after October 7th happened that for those voices who were incredibly critical, that they were going to show that in their spending, and Jamal Bowman obviously was one of those.
Very few of the ads actually mentioned Israel. That is not the marquee issue in this race. As far as I'm concerned, talking with local voters, I am just from south of that particular district. My friend's actually a county legislator from that district, and if you in fact talk to voters in that district, they would say it's not about Israel. It's about the fact that Jamal Bowman hasn't delivered there, and George Latimer is a longtime local Paul there.
Yeah, and Harry, hang on a second, because we do have a projection to make. CNN can now project that Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert will win the Republican primary in Colorado's 4th congressional district. After she was facing a tough re-election in her own district, she actually switched to run in a more Republican-leaning one. And Harry, this was something that a lot of Republicans were actually unhappy about when this happened. There were accusations against her. But her last race, I mean, it was hundreds of votes decided it, maybe even fewer than that, before she switched here. What do you make of this? I believe it was a 6-way race between Republicans.
It was a 6-way race. Look, she vastly outraised her opponent. She had vastly higher name recognition. This is a very safe district come the fall. Ken Buck, of course, retiring, who was not exactly friendly to Donald Trump. You'll end up with a much friendlier Donald Trump voice now from Colorado's 4th district. At least as far as Lauren Boebert's concerned, this was the right move. It definitely paid off, and she's definitely a favorite heading into the fall.
Yeah, and we'll see what that continues to look like as you track the New York races. Harry Enton, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Up, we're going to go next straight to the source with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. A lot to discuss with him. He will join us live in just moments. Also, are the Biden and Trump campaigns listening? Because we're going to speak to perhaps one of the most sourced people in America about what is the secret strategy that has been proven to win debates. Breaking news with a projection to make right now is Westchester County Executive Democrat George Latimer is going to defeat incumbent Congressman Jamal Bowman, who is now the first member of the so-called squad to be ousted in what was New York's House primary and the most expensive House primary race that we have ever seen in New York's 16th congressional district. You heard from George Latimer here last night, and now we can report he is expected to win that race and will likely win that race in November.
Right here in New York, are we watching an omen of what November may bring? That's tonight on Newsnight.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good evening. I'm Abby Phillip in New York. Moments ago, a major CNN projection in the race the entire political world's attention has been fixated on tonight. Jamal Bowman is now officially out of a job. The squad member losing tonight to George Latimer. It is an important marker, and it shows the potential political power and peril of the war in Gaza. It also shows that candidates are taking a dramatic risk, perhaps, when they alienate Jewish voters. Bowman is younger, more high profile. He's a key fixture in what was thought to be the rising wing of the Democratic Party, alongside fellow New Yorker Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and also Ilhan Omar. But he is now on the losing end of the most expensive House primary in American history. CNN senior data reporter Harry Enton is over at the Magic Wall and has the latest results for us. So, Harry, what happened there in New York 16?
Yeah, I mean, look, you had the margin up on your screen. I got my nice little yellow check mark up here. A double-digit win for George Latimer. You very rarely see incumbents losing by this wide of a margin, double digits. You know, what happened, you asked, Abby? Well, a few things happened. Number one, I would say Jamal Bowman didn't exactly know his district. What do I mean when I say that? Well, let's break it down by county, these particular results, right? The 16th district is partially the Bronx. It's also partially Westchester. Let's go to the Bronx part of the district. What do you see? Oh, that's a little bit further. Now, here we go. We'll talk about the Bronx. We'll talk about Westchester. If you look at Westchester, what you see is a tremendous margin for for George Latimer. If you look at the Bronx portion of the district, what do you see? You see the exact opposite. You see a very large margin for George Latimer. The issue, of course, is that the Westchester part of the district makes up a considerably larger portion of the vote. More than that, you know, there's this whole question, okay, this is a primary, right? Normally we deal with low turnout. Well, look back to where we were in 2022. Look at the turnout, the total votes that were cast in New York's 16th district. What did we see? We saw a little less than 40,000 folks cast the ballot. Look how many folks cast the ballot this time around. Only so far. We're looking at about 55,000 votes already cast, with still a considerable portion of the vote still to go in New York's 16th congressional district. You also mentioned Israel earlier on, Abby. Here's the thing that I will note. George Latimer led this race wire to wire. Even before any of that AIPAC money hit the air, George Latimer was ahead in the internal polling by double digits. And as we look at this race right now, what do we see? We see it definitely paid off for George Latimer. A longtime local Paul, served in Rye as early as 1987. He is the winner tonight. Jamal Bowman is out of a job, in large part because, in my opinion, he didn't know his voters well enough, Abby.
A major moment for the House of Representatives and for Jamal Bowman. Harry, thank you very much. We'll check in with you later. A lot to digest tonight with our panel, and George Latimer will join me live in just a few moments. But first, here on set with me, Republican strategist Joe Pinion, former White House Deputy Press Secretary for the Obama administration, Bill Burton, CNN political commentator S.E. Cupp, and CNN senior political commentator David Axelrod. David, this is an earthquake. The squad came in with a bang in the 2020 election. Now, one of its members is out of a job over an issue that has animated the progressive left, but alienated them from the center left as well, perhaps.
Yeah, look, I think that there's no denying that this was at the center of the race. But Jamal Bowman had other problems as well that we shouldn't ignore. You know, maybe best characterized or symbolized by his decision to pull a fire alarm in the middle of a vote to stop a vote in Congress, for which he was cited. And so, you know, he had issues. This is in the main, a more center-left district, and he got elected in the George Floyd year. But I think this is part. We should just a couple of weeks ago there were primaries in Oregon in Portland where you saw two progressive candidates lose to center-left candidates, and so the question isn't just about Israel, which is obviously a divisive issue within the Democratic Party between the progressive contingent and other Democrats, but also whether there is a general moving more to the center among Democratic primary voters.
Bill, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that Bowman ran a campaign that was true to who he is as a progressive. He brought out AOC and Bernie Sanders. He had some high-profile interviews, including on The Breakfast Club with Charlemagne the God. But to David's point, that's just not where this district was. This district is a center-left district. And I think that if you spend $20 million against someone whose politics don't totally match up with where the district is, you just don't have a shot.
Ultimately, this will also be seen through the prism of the Gaza war. And there are concerns out there on the left that this is an issue that could divide Democrats.
Well, it is. It is dividing Democrats. I was speaking to a number of voters in Michigan who have said, we are staying home, we're done, we're gone. We are not coming back home for Joe Biden, which is kind of wild to think about because the alternatives, Trump and RFK Jr., are even more pro-Israel. So these are people who are that offended and disaffected that they want to stay home. On the other hand, you've got people like Bowman really sort of cartoonishly exaggerating when they go out on the stump. He trafficked in some conspiracy theories that were really ugly. He later apologized for them. There was a story that he contacted some Jews that he knew, asking for photographs to prove that he had friends in the Jewish community. A lot of missteps. And what we're seeing is that Jewish voters in Westchester voted early, real early. I mean, something like 15% had already clocked in their votes. So they were really animated by that. But as David said, he had other problems. The ads that were running against Jamal Bowman criticized him from the center left for going after Biden and not being with Biden enough. He had some issues.
I want to play one of those ads that you just mentioned. This is just an example of all the money that poured into this race.
Jamal Bowman keeps attacking President Biden, and it's hurting New York. Bowman called President Biden a liar. He voted against the president's Infrastructure Act, against rebuilding roads and bridges in New York. Jamal Bowman has his own agenda, and he's hurting New York.
George Latimer will take on MAGA extremists, and he'll work with President Biden to keep delivering progressive results.
So not exactly attacking him from the right there. I mean, for Republicans, what message would you take away from what happened here tonight?
Look, I don't really believe this is about Republicans. I think that there is a gut check moment happening for Democrats. That one, are they going to be tolerant of unabashed anti-Semitism within their ranks? I think that's a real issue. You cannot deny that. You see the money that was spent, over $25 million. It was an avalanche of cash that drove that turnout. But I think, even to Harry's point, this race was in many ways over before it started. Look, I grew up in the 16th for a great deal of my life in Yonkers, New York. For the longest time, we had Elliot Engel, most famous for hanging out by the railing, waiting for the president to come give the State of the Union. But at the end of the day, I disagree with his politics, but he certainly comported himself in a way that the district could be proud. And so when you have somebody who spends their entire life as an educator, who then goes to D.C., starts pulling fire alarms and pretends he has no idea that the fire alarm is actually a fire alarm, when he is running around cursing and acting in a profane manner, I think he was so eager to be part of the squad that he doth protest too much. He was the last one in, and he is now the last one out. And I think for me, the question becomes, does he gracefully bow out? Does he continue to go down this rabbit hole because he does have the Working Family Party line? Originally, he did give the Working Family response to Biden in 2021. I think Democrats gave them their response. He's going to be looking for a new job.
Abby, one of the things like I said, I think there was much more at play than this issue. But on the issue of Israel and Gaza, he was one of those who was pretty reluctant to criticize Hamas and accept the reports of what Hamas had done, the atrocities of October 7th. I think that was a bridge too far for a lot of, I think it's possible to hold two thoughts. I hold them. I was absolutely devastated by what happened on October 7th, and I weep for the children of Gaza. I think it's possible to do those two things. He wasn't doing those two things.
But do you think that the race was being made to be about AIPAC money?
Yes.
That the impact of money in politics. Bernie Sanders and AOC basically said big money is buying this race. I mean, is that a fair criticism?
Look, I think there's no doubt that big money played a role, that AIPAC's money played a role, but they also had something to work with. As you saw, that ad was not about Israel. That ad was about Jamal Bowman, and he did not fit that district. So yes, on the one hand, and you see it in other districts. You see in the Cori Bush race in Missouri, you see some of this. But at the end of the day, if someone has a solid base and is in tune with their district, all the money in the world is hard to beat an incumbent. He was a sitting duck in some ways, not because of this issue, but because of many issues.
Yeah, one of which was, Hakeem Jeffries has talked about this sort of thorn in his side of the far left extremes. Hakeem Jeffries wants to take back the House. He wants candidates more like Tom Suozzi in New York, and less like Jamal Bowman running around kind of embarrassing the party. So there were those internal party factors as well.
I think to that point, obviously George is going to be joining us. Look, I don't agree with his politics, but I think Jamal Bowman never saw a two-term sitting county executive coming at him from the right, somebody who quite literally has never lost an election. So you see somebody who has gone from Rye, gone to the state Senate, gone to become county executive, is a known quantity in Westchester in particular in that district. I think that he spent so much time hanging out with AOC, he believed that that district reflected his own. And I think to Harry's point, he found out the hard way it did not.
All right, everyone stand by for me. The winner, George Latimer, as we've been discussing, he's going to join me live in just moments. Plus, we're going to talk about the big debate that's just 47 hours away. Stay with us. This is News 9. More on our breaking news. CNN projects that current Westchester County executive and primary challenger George Latimer has defeated Squad Congressman Jamal Bowman in a major House race upset. He is going to join us in just a moment. But this is, for our panel here back in New York, a moment for the Squad. Where do they go from here, Bill?
Well, I don't think you have a lot of Squad members in districts like this one, right? I think that this is a very particular set of circumstances where the politics didn't necessarily match up with where the voters were. So I think that, the Squad is going to continue to be the progressive voice of the Democratic Party and continue to push on the edges of where politics are. And I think that there's a place for that, and that's fine. It's just probably not in districts like this.
What about AIPAC? I mean, are you comfortable, Joe, with the way that they are playing? I mean, it's not just this race. I mean, they have gone after progressive Democrats in a bunch of different races, sometimes have lost. But are you comfortable with the way that they are wielding their power in electoral politics?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, they're not the only group that spends outrageous amounts of money on politics. So I think to single them out in that regard is unfair. I think in many ways, maybe I'm the rare voice, but they've made some mistakes, and those mistakes have reaped the Jamal Bowmans of the world. If you look at what happened on October 7th, going all the way back many years, AIPAC has endorsed many incumbents, the Chuck Schumers of the world, the Kirsten Gillibrands of the world, people who have spent a great deal of their time now undermining Benjamin Netanyahu at a time when Israel needs our support the most. And so I think this kind of reflexive status quo support has led to this place where they had to spend so much money.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because I do think this kind of speaks to where we are politically. It used to be that AIPAC was sort of somewhere in the center of the two parties. The accusation today is that now they have moved actually to the right, and they don't want to acknowledge that that's what's happened.
Well, I mean, part of it is that they take their signals from the government of Israel and whoever the government is at that moment. Netanyahu has been a dominant force, and he's created these alliances with the Republican Party here. It's interesting, he got sideways with Donald Trump because he acknowledged Biden's election, and Trump was very angry at him and has said so publicly. And now it feels like he's working hard to sort of make amends and hedge his bets on this next election. But I just disagree with you, Joe, on the idea that that somehow if you're an American politician or an American president and you disagree with Benjamin Netanyahu, that somehow that makes you anti-Israel or worthy opposition. There are plenty of people in Israel who oppose what Netanyahu is doing and have questions about how he's conducted this war.
What I'm saying specifically is not that someone cannot disagree with the tactics of Israel, or not saying that somebody cannot actually criticize the prime minister of Israel. What I am saying is that there has been a certain level of consternation at a point in time when America needs to be supporting Israel in their efforts to root out Hamas, root and stem. And so I think, again, to your point, you can hold two positions at the same time. Yes, we can say that there is a place for criticism, but we have gone past criticism. We have gone to a point where I truly believe that if you actually look at the statements that have been made by key stakeholders within the Democratic Party that have previously been supported by AIPAC, they have done things that have made it more difficult for us to get those hostages back, have made it more difficult for Israel to press their cause. And that is just my position.
Some would argue that the difficulty in getting the hostages back is Netanyahu himself, who has repeatedly turned down various proposals. So I don't know that it's fair to say that. All I know is this: I don't know where Israel would be without the kind of support that America has provided. I'm old enough to remember when Iranian drones were coming over Israel a few months ago, and they were shot down mostly by American
All right, guys.
weapons.
Sure.
So,
Everyone stand by for me. George Latimer is joining me now. Sir, congratulations and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Abby. It's an honor to be with you tonight.
So this is, as we've been saying, the most expensive House primary in the history of this country. $25 million poured into this New York district, more than $14 million from AIPAC. What do you say to some of your constituents who are concerned about that kind of money pouring into politics in this way?
Well, the first thing I can say, Abby, is I've been in public office for 35 years. I've held a variety of positions. I've never once changed a position based on a campaign donation, ever. Nobody's ever accused me of that. What I know is that in winning this race tonight, I didn't win it on the national debate. I won it because I went door to door where I could all throughout this district, and I talked to people about the issues they wanted to talk about, which included what's happening in the Middle East, but really prioritized domestic issues, things of affordability, housing, restoration of the SALT tax deduction. So I think that the constituents that I talk to are the ones that I am most interested in their point of view, and that's the one that I'm going to try to focus on. I understand the national debate, but I think in this district, that national debate was secondary to the local discussion of who could best represent this district on domestic issues.
I do want to play, though, something that you said that got a lot of controversy. Let me just play this clip for our audience here.
When you get as much money as you get from outside the district, your constituency is Dearborn, Michigan. Your constituency is San Francisco, California. It's not Harrison. It's not Tuckahoe. It's not Scarsdale.
So there in that clip, you're critiquing Jamal Bowman for getting money from outside of the district, from Dearborn, Michigan. That was viewed as, by Bowman, an Islamophobic dog whistle. Could you just address that and also address how you can make that critique while also receiving money from outside of the district as well?
Well, let's begin with the fact that the fundraising that we had in our campaign was more than half from within the district. So the incumbent raised 10% from within the district. So there's no comparison about who drew resources from within the district. I drew far more resources from the people who vote in the 16th district than he did. Now, what I said was referring to where he had raised money from. It's not a dog whistle of anything. He had a major fundraiser in California. He raised more money in California in the last report than he made from New York. So it wasn't a dog whistle about California. And as far as Dearborn, Michigan is concerned, Representative Tlaib and the incumbent formed a joint fundraising committee on February 14th. She draws her money from her district, and she's based in Dearborn, Michigan. It's a geographic reference, not a demographic reference. Now, I understand that in order to try to advance his candidacy, the incumbent tried to turn it into something that it wasn't. But the bottom line is, it is clear that he raised money more in proportion outside the district from a nationwide network of donors that included people from those locations and others. That's a fact.
So Congressman Bowman is now the first member of the squad to lose their seat since that group started 6 years ago. What does your victory tonight say about the power of the progressive left and the future for the progressive left when it comes to New York politics?
Well, let's be clear. I'm a progressive. I have done a number of things in my home county. We've passed a clinic access law. We've done a wide range of things to help the LGBTQ community. We've had a black maternal health care initiative. We've lowered the cost of child care for people. We've electrified a bus. All those are progressive goals. This race has been misrepresented by those who want to see it as progressive versus something else. I guess he wanted to frame me as a MAGA conservative, which is absurd. What it does show is that when you lose touch with your district, when you're not on the ground enough, and when you're more concerned about your national profile, that you're on, the major media outlets, but you're not in the neighborhoods that you need to be in, all the neighborhoods you need to be in, then you lose the focus and you lose support in your district. I won because I worked hard and I have a record of delivering for the people who live in this area, in this community. I may not be a national figure in the years to come. I just want to be a good representative of my district, and I think that's what they voted for tonight.
George Latimer, fresh off of a huge upset victory tonight in New York. Thank you very much for joining us from your campaign headquarters tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
And up next, it's not going to be a shit show like the last time. That's the quote tonight, reportedly from a Trump advisor, just 48 hours to go until that debate. And plus, former Obama official Jay Carney will join me on his advice for President Biden. This is News 9.
We begin with that breaking news out of New York today. One of the most progressive Democrats in Congress is now out of a seat. CNN projects George Latimer has now unseated Jamal Bowman in a historic and bitter primary in New York's 16th congressional district. Pro-Israel groups had backed Latimer, a moderate, and funneled millions of dollars into this race to unseat Bowman, and they were successful. It is the most expensive House primary race in all of American history. Now, this could have implications far beyond just this 16th district in New York. It's not just a local race we're talking about. For one, it shows just how divided the party is on Israel's war in Gaza, which is a critical issue that has frankly dogged Democrats and President Biden's reelection bid. Bowman, a two-term progressive, has been one of the loudest critics of Israel's war. Now, Latimer, on the other hand, he's expressed support for Israel. Though, to be clear, this election had a lot of other dynamics at play. It was not a one-issue race, with Latimer accusing Bowman of caring more about his national profile than his local constituents. Here's Latimer on that point just last hour on CNN.
When you lose touch with your district, when you're not on the ground enough, and when you're more concerned about your national profile, that you're on, the major media outlets, but you're not in the neighborhoods that you need to be in, all the neighborhoods you need to be in, then you lose the focus and you lose support in your district.
Well, nationally, this is an undeniable blow to the party's progressive wing. I mean, Bowman is now the first member of the Congresswoman AOC's led squad to lose a primary challenge this cycle. Now, there's a lot of coverage on all this ahead and a lot more races to go. And in a minute, we'll hear from former New York Congressman Joe Crowley. But our Miguel Marquez, he is at Bowman headquarters with his reaction. But let's first, for a moment, get to CNN's Harry Enton at the Magic Wall. I've got quite the spread here of people to give their expertise and talk about the issues. Harry Enton, good to see you. Talk to me about this race. How did Latimer pull this off? This was a two-term incumbent.
You mentioned spreads. I should note I was up in the 16th district last week. I was getting Carvel. You got food on my mind. Anyway.
You and I can talk food all day, my friend.
We still have to hit up a diner. Anyway, all right, let's talk about New York 16th district. We got the yellow check mark by George Latimer. A clear victory here. We're talking double digits. You rarely ever see an incumbent lose by double digits. And you'd speak about how did he do it? Well, let's go in on the county level. All right, Jamal Bowman held that rally this past weekend in the South Bronx, which I should note is not actually part of the 16th district. But, he basically said, we're going to show what the Bronx is made of. Well, the Bronx actually went for Jamal Bowman. Look at this, an 84% to 16% margin. Here is the problem, something I saw throughout this entire campaign. It seemed to me that Jamal Bowman didn't know who his constituents were, and George Latimer did. Because the fact is, you see this margin in the Bronx, but let's go up to Westchester County. What do we see? Westchester County, which makes up the vast majority of this district, George Latimer, 62% of the vote. Jamal Bowman, just 38% of the vote. You know, one other thing progressives like to argue. They like to argue, okay, you know, when our voters turn out, we win. But look here. In 2022, there was just a little bit less than 40,000 votes. Already, with still a lot of votes to be counted, look here. Already about 61,000 votes already cast in this race. So the fact is, Laura, more people turned out this year than turned out 2 years ago. And it seemed to me that those voters, especially in Westchester County, overwhelmingly went for George Latimer.
Now, don't think for a second that John King didn't notice that drag from the bottom you did on that magic wall. I'm just saying, I saw it. Kudos to you. But the outside spending is what people have been talking about in this particular race. I mean, it was through the roof. The most expensive primary in American history. We're talking about the 16th district in New York. Now, my husband's from the Bronx, so shout out to the Bronx. But the idea here that you had all this outside spending is very telling.
It is. But, you know, a thing I should point out about this, you know, I want to go back 2 years ago. And I want to note that Jamal Bowman was in trouble in this district long before any of that spending started. You know, you go back to 2022, Jamal Bowman, for an incumbent, got just 54% of the vote. Yes, the spending helped, but here's the deal. George Latimer has been a politician in Westchester County before I was born. Also notable that George Latimer was somebody who was well-liked completely across the board, got endorsements from all over Westchester County, and more than that, he led in this race basically from the start. When he got in, he was leading an internal polling in January before any of this money got really spent on the air. Yes. Did the money help? Yes. Did Israel play a part in this campaign? Yes. But as you hinted at in your opening, this election was more than just about Israel. It was about local politicians. George Latimer was known throughout Westchester, and it paid off tonight.
That's really a telling figure you just gave us there. Harry Enton, thank you so much. I want to bring in CNN's Miguel Marquez live outside campaign headquarters for Congressman Bowman in Yonkers, New York, just outside of New York City. Miguel, Bowman, he just spoke. What was his message to his supporters?
Not surprisingly, he was defiant, saying that he would continue to fight for all the issues that they were fighting for, whether it's Medicaid for all or Medicare for all, or for Free Palestine. When he said that he would continue to fight for Free Palestine, that got the biggest cheer in the House. But look, he was upset about the money. His campaign, the progressive left that worked with his campaign was extremely upset. $25 million spent in this campaign. About $15 million of it came from the super PAC associated with the American Israel Political Action Committee. He was very upset about it. When he conceded today, he said he didn't have one opponent, but opponents.
And the other opponent?
Now, our opponent may have won this round at this time in this place, but this will be a battle for our humanity and justice for the rest of our lives.
And what his campaign is saying, and what the progressive left that worked with his campaign is saying, is that Cori Bush in St. Louis will be the next target for AIPAC. But look, as Harry was saying, this district is much more moderate. George Latimer is extremely well known in this district, and it was going to be a very difficult race for Bowman no matter what. The money, the airwaves here were awash in ads for, you know, AIPAC was funding the ads, but they weren't pro-Israel ads. They never mentioned Gaza. They only talked about how close each candidate was to Bush. That may have been the most interesting thing of this campaign. Both Latimer and Jamal Bowman both said they were the best ones to serve Joe Biden, and we don't hear that in a lot of campaigns anywhere. Back to you.
Miguel Marquez, thank you so much. Joining me now, former New York Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley. He served in Congress until 2019 when he was unseated by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in a Democratic primary. Congressman, thank you so much for joining. I mean, these numbers are significant, and it's significant to have Bowman be unseated in this fashion. It's an upset victory in many ways, but here was Latimer on CNN just the last hour with my friend Abby Phillip talking about why he thought he won. Listen.
I didn't win it on the national debate. I won it because I went door to door where I could all throughout this district, and I talked to people about the issues they wanted to talk about, which included what's happening in the Middle East, but really prioritized domestic issues, things of affordability, housing, restoration of the SALT tax deduction. So I think that the constituents that I talk to are the ones that I am most interested in their point of view, and that's the one that I'm going to try to focus on.
He went on to talk about how this had been mischaracterized as progressive against somebody who was not, but he himself said he is progressive. Do you think that Bowman lost touch with his constituents, or is this a factor of domestic versus foreign policy taking precedent?
I'm not convinced that this was a great seat for Bowman to begin with. I think that was represented in the numbers that I think was Harry had said about the last election. He did oust Eliot Engel, a 25-plus year incumbent. I think that has a lot to do with, the more you know someone, the more you know them, and I think that in this particular race, both candidates are very progressive. So I really don't think it was on necessarily those issues. I think it had to do more with the performance of Bowman than maybe the more bombastic performances of Bowman throughout the last couple of years in particular.
And there was a mention of, another member of Congress, Congresswoman Cori Bush, also having a race where there is funding by AIPAC for her opponent. It's somebody, Wesley Bell, a prosecutor who was, I believe, the one to decide not to prosecute an officer in the shooting death of Mike Brown in Ferguson. Is this some message, you think, on a national scale for members of the progressive left?
I think that when you see an election where they have been effective in terms of winning an election, it actually encourages them to do even more. I don't think it's about, again, the issues. I think it's going to be about the money. And I do think that the pro-Israel groups do not look at Bush as an ally, and therefore may take the very same tactics they did here. But every district is different. What's happening in Westchester and the northern Bronx is completely different than what's happening, in the middle of the country.
When you look at, the identity of a party, and we often see that being raised. I mean, Jamal Bowman, a black man, an educator, I think he's in his 40s. Latimer, not any of the things I've just described. There is a visual distinction that people often look at. Does this signal anything to you about the future of the way the Democratic Party is shaping up to voters?
Well, I do think that in many respects, this might be very beneficial to the president in that, there seems to be a swinging of the pendulum. It went very far left in 2018, 2020, to some degree in 2022, but it's kind of starting to come back a bit. And I think it's going to be beneficial for the president to be able to speak to the middle of the country and not necessarily, look, at the end of the day, we all come together as Democrats. We understand that re-electing President Trump is not good for anyone, not good for America, not good for the world. And we need to come back. But I think it will give the president an opportunity maybe to move towards the middle here and appeal to Republicans as well.
That's interesting to think about that and how this might bode for President Biden, who's undoubtedly watching this race and thinking about the composition of Congress. But money in politics is something you can't deny when you look at a race like this. I mean, the most expensive race in the history of this country, $25 million in ad spending alone. What does this say about the influence of outside money?
Well, it says a lot. There's no question about it. I mean, Citizens United has been a disaster for politics in America. Everything, though, that was done in this race, to my understanding, was law-abiding. They followed the rules and followed the law. And both sides have access to money in terms of this particular race. If you look at Bowman's numbers, most of his money came from outside the district. I know there's been a lot of criticism of Latimer for the same, but Latimer had most of his money come from within inside the district. So I do think that's important to look at. Being able to raise $1 and $3 from millions of people is a benefit that not many members of Congress have. In fact, very few have that. So they have to rely on the system, and that is through PACs and through individual contributions, and then in some cases even by outside money. I don't like it. I think it's abused by all sides, left, right, middle, and I'd like to see that change. But that's going to take changing the Supreme Court, or at least changing the Constitution to make it clear that that type of money is not acceptable in American politics.
Well, this was a nasty primary. I wonder how this will bode as a preview to a bigger race, the presidential race going in November. Congressman, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Laura.
There's new reporting tonight on President Biden's debate strategy and an attack line that we should likely expect to see. The question is it going to land? Colorado Governor Jared Polis is here to help us answer that very question. His insights on the high-stakes debate next. Up next, more on our breaking news. A huge defeat for one of the most progressive Democrats in all of Congress. So what does that mean for the Democratic Party more broadly? We're going to talk about it. We are following the breaking news. New York Congressman Jamal Bowman suffering a stinging primary defeat to George Latimer in the most expensive House primary ever. It was a double-digit loss and a blow to progressives, although both candidates say that they are, in fact, progressives. Joining me now, campaign reporter for the Washington Post, Colby Ickowitz, former senior advisor to the Bernie Sanders 2016 and 2020 presidential campaigns, Chuck Rocha, and former deputy communications director for the Trump 2016 campaign, Brian Lanza. So good to have all of you here. First, let me begin with you, Chuck, on this, because this is a really important loss. I do wonder, from your perspective, is it a kind of turning point for progressives, or is this localized?
I think it's localized because every district's a little bit different. If you look at all the squad members, most of them are in urban areas where they're voting their constituency. That's how they get reelected. This district is outside of New York City, and as we'll report on, a lot of it, the majority of it is in Westchester County. And after the first time Congressman Bowman ran, they took 40,000 people in the Bronx. They were mainly black working class folks. Little Jamaican was there. They moved them out, and it was no longer there in 2022. When he did have a primary, there was nobody running from Westchester. This is not a city district anymore, so I don't think you can weigh them against each other.
Why are you smiling about this?
Yeah, it's for me, I look at it as trying to avoid the obvious. There's a disturbance in the Democratic Party with respect to Israel, and you're seeing it sort of highlighted in this race. You're seeing it highlighted again. You're going to see it at the highlighted Democratic Convention. You're seeing it highlighted in these campuses. There's a major disruption in the Democratic Party with respect to the Israel policy, and it's one race here. We'll see it in other races, and it's just an unavoidable train wreck that the Dems are headed down. And this is just one. This is just one stop along this train wreck.
And I want to make something clear that there was a lot of AIPAC money that I'm sure we're going to talk about. The most expensive primary election in the history of elections. And as a campaign consultant, it makes me cry a little bit on the inside because I would like to get a little bit of that money.
Where's your cut?
But, right, exactly. But even though AIPAC spent a lot of money, ironically, when I look back at all the commercials, none of them were about Israel and Palestine. The $20 million that was spent on TV were talking about other issues, but not Israel and Palestine.
It was a nasty primary, though, and the ads that were being run, they may not have talked about it specifically, but there was the elephant in the room.
Yes, and they were all, most of the attack ads against Jamal Bowman were funded by AIPAC, Super PAC. But to your point, they weren't talking about Israel. They were talking about Jamal Bowman's legislative record, the fact that he voted against Joe Biden's infrastructure bill, the fact that he didn't stand with Biden on certain legislative accomplishments, and really trying to paint Bowman as an outsider, as someone who wasn't looking out for the best interests of the district. And that's something that George Latimer was really selling from the moment that he got into this race, was the idea that he's someone they knew. He'd been a local elected official for decades in Westchester County, quite beloved, actually, among a wide swath of the communities in Westchester. And so what he was said, from the minute he got in is, I know you, and Jamal Bowman doesn't.
Listen to some of the ads that were run, just to talk about very specifically. They may not have mentioned what we're talking about, but listen just to kind of the tenor of it.
I'm George Latimer, and whether you live in Portchester, Greenburgh, or Co-op City, we're fed up with the chaos that's hanging over our heads. Trump extremists in Washington and a congressman spreading lies and conspiracy theories.
George Latimer has sold out to Republican-funded AIPAC, supporting Netanyahu's unpopular war over Biden's calls for peace. But Jamal Bowman always stands up for what's right.
I spent my life fighting for children and families. This is the many versus the money.
The many versus the money. First of all, that's something that can probably be used more expensively even outside of New York. But there's a Congresswoman, Cori Bush, that people are talking about right now as vulnerable in her own primary. How worried should she be?
I think anytime you see this much money spent in any kind of a primary, Democrat or Republican, it makes a big deal because there's only a small group of people that participate. You just had the congressman on from New York here earlier tonight that AOC had beat back in the day. We were talking about in the green room. There was only about 10,000 people that even voted in that primary. So when you have a small group of people and a lot of money, it has a big impact. And also tonight, when we're thinking about patterns, let's remember that AOC could be the queen of the AOC. Most of the folks would say of the squad. She had a contested primary tonight with outside money that came in not near at this level. But if there was a problem, she wouldn't have won tonight with almost 90% of the vote in her Democratic primary.
Go ahead, excuse me.
Yeah, I was going to say, AIPAC kind of looked at the field of squad members. They would like to oust every single one of them as they see as antagonistic against Israel. But they picked two, and they picked Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush as the two that they thought were most likely to be beat by their primary challengers. And so we saw how much money AIPAC put into this race, and you can expect a similar amount of money now put into this August primary that Cori Bush has.
Why were those two chosen? Is it the language reg they were speaking about, or are there other issues in terms of the strength of their opponent?
They had district
Right.
issues. You know, listen, both of these members have district issues. You know, AIPAC jumping in and highlighting those district issues, you know, became the combustible part for Jamal and for Cori Bush. And she's got district issues too, and there's going to be money coming in. These are going to be the first steps in a long process of AIPAC playing in these races, and you're going to see more and more of members who have, you know, district issues work on them and try to not to appease, but have broad appeal to their constituency, which right now some don't.
It's also a candidate quality issue. AIPAC kind of looked across the field and thought, who can actually beat these members of the squad? And in George Latimer, who's someone that they really lobbied and urged to run, especially after the October 7th attacks, they saw in Latimer someone that could beat Jamal Bowman and was worth spending, you know, the $14.5 million that they spent.
Candidate recruitment is key.
Well, real quickly, we heard from former Congressman Crowley earlier, and he said that this win of Latimer is probably going to likely inure the benefit or please President Joe Biden because it shows moderates might be successful. How do you see it?
I don't think Latimer's a moderate. I think that the district is just different. They went in and recruited this guy who's already elected county-wide in the biggest county that makes up 80% of the district. It's just math.
Well, the math needs to be mathin', everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight. A murder case that has gripped Massachusetts is now in the hands of a jury. Is Karen Reed the culprit of a romance turned deadly or the victim of a vast police cover-up? That's next.
You have been lied to in this courtroom.
Right, to keep America's most closely guarded secrets. And look how he kept them in overturned boxes alongside newspapers, keepsakes, and maybe even junk. Also tonight, Julian Assange is set free. To some, he's a champion of truth. To others, he's a dangerous and reckless criminal who put many lives at risk by revealing sensitive information to the public. Plus, the polls remain open in New York as progressive Democrat Jamal Bowman faces a tough primary battle to keep his seat in the most expensive House primary ever. Key primaries are underway in New York, Utah, and Colorado, where Lauren Boebert is pushing pause on her multiple scandals to salvage her place in Congress. Last year, Boebert, who nearly lost in 2022, switched to a solidly Republican district on the opposite side of the state to boost her chances of staying in the House. Meanwhile, primary day in New York is coming to a close. Polls are open until 9 p.m. Eastern, and anyone who is in line by 9 will be allowed to cast their vote. So hurry up, New Yorkers, you still have time. All eyes are on the state's 16th congressional district, which covers parts of Westchester County and the Northeast Bronx. Representative Jamal Bowman is facing a well-funded challenge from Westchester County Executive George Latimer. It is the most expensive congressional primary in history, with almost $25 million raised and spent. It's also a bitter and divisive race, putting a spotlight on the Democratic Party's tensions around Gaza, as well as its divisions around race, wealth, and corporate greed.
I just feel like Bowman is just a little too aggressive. Like, I watch his rallies, I watch the way he's campaigned, and it's just always aggressiveness. I feel like when you're at a certain place in politics, you got to speak with a vocabulary that's deemed edible, like for all crowds. If it's kids, if it's old people, you got to speak with a vocabulary that's just like we can relate to. All the cursing, profanity, all the extraness, it's not needed because you're a man that's representing everyone.
I can tell that there's been a lot of money spent on this race. And it is important. It's very important, especially to Westchester County and the Northeast Bronx. We need money coming into the community to help the community out. We need housing, affordable housing. We need programs for the kids. We need summer programs, summer jobs.
Joining me now from Mount Vernon, New York, is NBC News correspondent Ali Vitale. Every time I hear Mount Vernon, I just want to say money earned in Mount Vernon. It's just a habit. Talk to me a little bit, Ali, about what you're hearing out there. What are you seeing? Is there energy that's visible for either candidate?
There's energy, but I have to say there's also a lot of reluctance. As I've been talking to voters out here, Joy, they are very much aware of the vitriol that has marked this race, and they're very much aware of the amount of eyeballs that are on this race, given the fact that $25 million have nearly been spent here on the airwaves. If you wanted to ignore this race, you basically cannot, because everywhere you go, every deli, every radio station is playing an ad that's either for or against Jamal Bowman or for or against George Latimer. It's an inescapable race, and that's why we're seeing people turn out. But I will say, as I've been standing out here today, and we've been out here since around 6:30 this morning, it has been a slow trickle. That's not to say there's not voters who aren't enthusiastic, but they're also pretty reluctant to share how they're voting because they know how tense it is, and they don't want their neighbors to judge their choice. It is a really difficult one, and there's a lot of different dynamics at play.
Now, I know you've had a chance to talk to some people. I've been really enjoying all of your interviews. I know you got some sound, so I'm going to throw that to you.
Well, we did get a chance to talk with Congressman Jamal Bowman about this, and I did speak with him and George Latimer over the weekend about what's governing this race. And I think what's so striking is that Bowman himself would point to AIPAC, would point to the stances that he's taken on things like Gaza as the reason that he has a challenger. His challenger says, though, that was only one of the reasons that he ultimately decided to get in this race. The other things that he pointed to were vulnerabilities that may explain why we're seeing the sheer amount of spending that we're seeing here in the first place. The fact that Bowman is one of the progressives that experts and operatives that I talked to, that you talked to, largely saw as vulnerable at the very start of this cycle. But I asked Bowman when I saw him here this evening, what the tension around this race has done to the community members who are voting in it, and why we're even seeing that reluctance when I'm just out here asking voters how they're voting and why. Listen to just a part of our conversation. Even as I've talked to voters, there are some who are like, I don't want to share who I voted for. I don't want my neighbors to know. It's gotten intense.
It's intense because AIPAC are bullies. AIPAC intimidates people. And my opponent has sided not just with AIPAC, but with Republican billionaires. And because he's been in office so long and because he's been county executive giving people jobs, people are afraid.
You hear Bowman there, again, turn the conversation back towards AIPAC, and it's something he did multiple times in our conversation. And look, we have to point out, AIPAC-aligned groups have spent over $14 million. They're responsible for the bulk of the cash that's been spent on the airwaves here. And most of those ads, although it's a group that is pro-Israel, most of those ads have actually been about the ways that Bowman has voted in Congress in ways that are divergent from the Biden administration. So it's not like those ads themselves are overtly focused on Israel and Gaza, but certainly that's an issue that voters themselves have surfaced here. I will add, there's one interesting piece of reporting that we've picked up in about the last hour or so, and it's the fact that while Latimer himself has said, hey, if I lose here, I'm not running for this seat anymore, Bowman himself was asked just in the last hour or so, will you agree not to run with the Working Families Party or stay on the ballot in some kind of way? And he just simply dodged the question and instead just said, we're going to win. Which, of course, is the posture that candidates, you know this, take on election night, because optimism is the only way to get through it. But at the same time, it's something Latimer has made clear he's knocking down, and Bowman is very much not.
That is very interesting, because that was what I was going to actually ask you, is does this feel like a healable divide? Because it feels racial, it feels like regional in, you know, the Westchester folks versus the South Bronx folks. It's very different people, very different demographics. Does it feel like a healable rift as you're just talking to people?
I think actually the answer to that question is something that we've talked about in our reporting and our stories on this race overall, which is the fact that this feels in some ways like a 2016 redux. It's got different issues at play, but the fact that Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton are both key endorsers in this race on opposite sides just shows how long this rift within the Democratic Party has been going on, and the ways in which that divide after 2016 was healable. Okay, let's see if it's healable on a micro scale here in the 16th Congressional District of New York. But I think it's important to note, too, we're already starting to see seeds of doubt be sown, especially from members of the Justice Democrats who are trying to say, oh, well, Hakeem Jeffries and congressional leadership didn't do enough here, almost trying to breadcrumb a reason for Bowman's loss if he loses. These are the kind of things, Joy, that make divides really hard to heal.
Fascinating. Such a great reporter. NBC's Ali Vitale. We're so lucky to have you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And coming up, the outsized consequences of African countries rejecting ties with their former colonial overlords in the West, and why we should be paying attention. We'll be right back.
Before that, we'll have the latest on some key primaries. Steve Kornacki is standing by at the big board. We're going to talk about the races tonight that have significant consequences for the Democratic Party. That's right after the break.
This is, in my view, one of the most important elections in the modern history of this country.
The specific race that Senator Bernie Sanders was talking about there is in New York's 16th congressional district, where Democrat Jamal Bowman faces George Latimer, a Westchester County executive in the most expensive House primary in U.S. history. Almost $25 million have been spent in this primary. The pro-Israel lobby, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, has shelled out more than $14 million in ads criticizing Congressman Bowman's position over the war in Gaza. Congressman Bowman has spoke out against Israel's actions in that conflict, while Mr. Latimer has refused to criticize Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And that refusal places him to the right of both President Joe Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Joining me now from the big board is Steve Kornacki, NBC and MSNBC's national political correspondent. Steve, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here. What can you tell us about this breaking news we have tonight?
Yeah, well, we got a lot of returns now in the 16th district of New York, and you see George Latimer with about a 13-point advantage over Jamal Bowman. Now, actually, we just got a big batch in there right now, and it comes down to just a touch under 10 points there, about 9.5. Let me see where that came in from. I'm trying to, okay, what just happened as I came on the air here is we got a bigger chunk of the Bronx County portion of this district. You can see here, the district is split between a small share in the Bronx, one of the boroughs of New York City, and then the vast majority of the district is north in Westchester County, the suburbs of New York City. So the Bronx portion, you can now see about 3/4 of the expected vote is in. This is, we knew, Jamal Bowman's big core base within the district. When he ran in 2022, he got several primary challengers the last time around in 2022, and he got 91% of the vote in the Bronx portion of the district. So he's running at about 83.5 right now. When you get a big batch in from the Bronx portion of the district, it's going to boost Bowman's numbers district-wide. But when you look within the Bronx, 83.6 is probably not where he wants to be. Again, he got 91% here when he had some primary challengers in 2022. And he didn't get much more than 50% district-wide in 2022. So he wants to be very close to that 91 in the Bronx. He's running at 83.5, and a lot of the vote now is in from the Bronx County portion of the district. Now let's flip it north to Westchester. And again, probably 90% plus of the vote's going to come from this part of the district. So there's far more votes here, and there's far less share of the vote. The expected vote is in Westchester County. And you can see the trend that's been established here. Latimer with just over a third of the vote now in, with a 30-point advantage, 30-plus point advantage over Bowman in Westchester County. Again, put this in some perspective. In that 2022 primary, when Bowman won and got just over 50% district-wide, what did he get in Westchester County in the 22 primary? He got 52% of the vote out of Westchester. Tonight, he's running at 35, and we're starting to look at some of the town-by-town results in Westchester, and you're seeing some pretty significant drop-offs for Bowman from where he was in 2022. And you can sort of see the dynamic here. 2022 on paper for Bowman, before all of the controversies of the last year or so, 2022 was kind of a warning sign for Bowman. Again, he barely got a majority in Westchester County, which is the vast majority of his district. So he couldn't afford coming into 2024 to slip much from those levels. And we're seeing, again, at the town-by-town level here, pretty significant slippage so far for Bowman. Now, again, more vote to come in. See if anything. It would take a pretty big change here, though, for Bowman. He'd have to really dramatically tighten this. And again, there's just no indication here. We've got an early vote from every city in town in New Rochelle, and it's pretty consistent. And you can see just another batch there came in as I was speaking in Westchester County, so we can update again and look at the district-wide totals. And there it is. You saw when we first came on here, Bowman had just gotten that batch of the Bronx in. It brought him under 10. We just got another batch from Westchester County. Latimer's vote now, his lead now basically back to 10. And again, a lot more to come out of Westchester than to come out of the Bronx. So if you're the Latimer campaign, you're probably feeling really good at what you're looking at right now. And if you're the Bowman campaign, these so far are not the numbers you were looking for. And one other quick note, just to tell you, there was a big primary, folks, getting getting a lot of national attention on the Republican side out in Colorado. And just a minute ago, NBC characterized this race and declared that Lauren Boebert, who moved from the 3rd congressional district in Colorado, where she had a very big scare in 2022, to the 4th congressional district on the eastern side of the state, open a seat here. Boebert has won that Republican primary. Colorado is a state that's basically all mail-in voting. So, look, 85% of the vote counted. That's within about 20 minutes of the polls closing in Colorado, and it's an emphatic victory for Lauren Boebert, obviously, who benefited from very divided opposition. Her opponents did not coalesce, did not unite behind a single alternative. 44% of the vote amounts to a landslide for Boebert in Colorado 4. Alex.
Lauren Boebert won re-election, I think, to Colorado's 3rd district by 546 votes, which may have something to do with why she moved to Colorado's 4th district. I just want to say, though, on the Bowman question, I think national Democrats, Steve, are looking at that carefully, given the fact that, there is a lot of debate inside the Democratic caucus about the position to take on Israel, and the Westchester-Bronx divide on the issue is significant. And I think that there's a lot of question about how Democrats calibrate their message. Bowman is seen in some ways as a canary in the coal mine, given how vocal he has been in his criticism of Israel and his criticism of the war in Gaza most generally.
Absolutely. And one note, too, on this is the district did change just a little between the 2022 primary and tonight. New York had one of these complicated legal cases around redistricting. The change occurred in the Bronx portion of the district that we're saying is Bowman's base. I'm zooming in. That apparently is as much as I can zoom in.
We actually have, Steve, a map of how the district has changed. How about that?
Put it on it, yeah.
The black line represents the current district, which has a greater share of Westchester County. The red line represents his district in 2020, which had a greater share of the Bronx.
Right. And so in between, in 2022, the last time Bowman ran, when I'm putting all these comparisons up on the board, that northern part of Westchester was already in the district. So from 2022 to tonight, there's one change, and it's this part, Wakefield, the Wakefield section of the Bronx. There's a large Caribbean population there. That previously was in the district. That was taken out, and it was replaced with this part of the Bronx, just a very small geographic area here. It's about 40,000 people. It's called Co-op City, and Co-op City has a majority black population, but I think one of the interesting things is the population is older. There's far more senior citizens in the section of the Bronx that was put in than was taken out. And you talk about Bowman, who has sort of calibrated his message in many ways, drawn a lot of support from younger voters. It is a majority black area. He's done very well in majority black areas, and he's doing very well in Co-op City tonight. But we're seeing a bit of slippage there, it appears, from 2022. You wonder, is the fact that it's an older demographic compared to where he was before in the Bronx, is that a factor here?
Well, there's going to be a lot of parsing of the data. We'll have more as it comes in. America's sweetheart, Steve Kornacki, it's always great to see you, buddy.
Thanks.
Still to come, more with the hosts of Pod Save America, what Democrats need to do to win in November, but also what has to happen after that if we want a functioning democracy. Plus, the judge overseeing Trump's criminal prosecution over classified documents held a closed-door hearing today that could significantly derail the special counsel's case if she agrees with Trump's defense team. We'll explain next. It has been nearly an hour since the polls closed in New York's primary races tonight, and already we have a projected winner in the most expensive House primary race in American history, where Westchester County Executive George Latimer has been attempting to unseat incumbent Congressman and Progressive Squad member Jamal Bowman. NBC News can now project George Latimer as the projected winner. Steve, what can you tell us about the numbers and how they may have changed since we talked to you about this just a second ago?
Yeah, we were just talking a minute ago about the basic divide in this district between the much smaller in terms of population slice of the Bronx that's in it. That's where Jamal Bowman is getting about 84% of the vote right now. But the vast majority of this district is up here in Westchester County, suburbs of New York City, some small cities in here as well. And this is where George Latimer is the county executive. And we said with about a third of the vote in, Latimer was running very well overall in the county, and Bowman was falling far short of numbers he had reached in this county in the 2022 primary. primary. And so basically what happened in the last 5 minutes here, I think, since I was on, is this. In Westchester, if you recall, we only had about 35 to 40% of the vote in. Now basically half the vote is in Westchester County. And what we've seen and what you can see here, if you were watching closely in the last segment, these numbers haven't changed. So this is kind of locking in right now, this Latimer advantage over Bowman. It's spread out geographically here. It's a consistent pattern basically everywhere where Bowman, everywhere in this district, Bowman is running short, well short, double-digit support, short in many cases of where he fared in the 2022 primary. And so it's consistent enough. There's enough vote in. And frankly, there's enough vote left now, given this trend, that you can expect Latimer to add to his margin here as more Westchester comes in, that you can look at the district and say, Bowman's not getting many more votes out of the Bronx. Latimer is out of Westchester County. Latimer already is ahead by almost 5,000 votes, 10 points district-wide. And so now, as we inch over the 50% mark district-wide, NBC projects that George Latimer has defeated incumbent Representative Jamal Bowman. It will make Bowman the third House member to lose a primary, pending that Bob Good result in Virginia, the third House member to lose a primary this cycle.
You know, Steve, I'm reminded of Bowman's sort of polling deficit going into the 2020 election, where he was running behind Eliot Engel, the longtime congressman, by 19 points, and then went on to defeat Engel by, I think, 14 points. I think Bowman was kind of hoping for a similar outcome tonight, right? He was polling decidedly behind Latimer, I think 17 points in some polls, and was saying this was a turnout election. But, man, you look at the amount of money that was spent on this race, the national import that was assigned to it, $14 million from AIPAC, $25 million overall. I mean, it's a race unlike any other.
No, absolutely. And again, the division in this district, there's that money that's come in. And obviously, it's a huge story here, just the fact of the cost of this race and the question of what impact that had. Though I would say before the money was spent in this race, Bowman's problems were clear here. As I said, in 2022, he didn't have a single primary opponent. So if you look on paper, Bowman had a pretty easy time surviving his primary in 2022. But if you added up all of the non-Bowman candidates in the 22 primary, Bowman won this district about 55-45, which is hardly resounding. And again, in the Westchester portion of the district, last time around, it was just 52-48 Bowman. And there are some towns here in Westchester, where he got 30%, 35, 25% of the vote. So there was a clear vulnerability in Westchester County for Bowman that really predated this cycle. It extended from the last one. And then you look at all the controversies and everything that's going into this cycle, and I think it only amplified that. But the vulnerability was already clear for Bowman. And I just think you'd say everything that he's kind of been involved in here in terms of controversy, it's only almost logical that in Westchester, where he was already in some serious trouble, it would just get worse for him.
Well, and I think that there are, like we said in the last block, there are a lot of Democrats who are trying to figure out what is the national message in and around Israel and the war in Gaza, where the death toll is just staggering and appalling. But the National Party has a lot of reconciliation to do in terms of what it wants its position to be. Netanyahu's coming for a joint session of Congress. That is going to put Democrats in an uncomfortable position. The specter of Bowman's loss is going to have implications for people inside of Congress and people outside of Congress in terms of how the party talks about it.
Yeah, and again, there's the question of the issue itself. There's also the question of just, there's this new breed of a member of Congress, it seems, who, sort of gravitates towards social media, towards some sort of provocative antics on social media. I think he might have been part of that as well. Question of how that goes over with voters in any congressional district. Obviously, the whole issue with pulling that fire alarm, and did that alone cause people to look at Bowman and say, I'm not so sure this should be our representative in Congress. So, a lot of things were kind of going on here. Besides, obviously, the issue you're describing there is a huge one. And again, the effort that went in nationally into this race is something you really haven't seen anywhere else. But it's a fascinating story here, because if you looked inside these numbers a couple years ago, you could see trouble coming for Jamal Bowman. And frankly, he does have a base in the district. But again, that overwhelming Bowman base is such a small part of the district, just in terms of the population balance. He had a real problem in Westchester, and there really just was no way. Once that problem got worse, there was no way out of the Bronx that he was going to get enough votes, to overcome that.
Steve Kornacki, it is always great to hear your analysis, get the updates. We appreciate your time on this evening of breaking news, my friend. Thanks for hanging with us.
Thanks.
Still to come, the judge Eileen Cannon today held a closed-door hearing in the classified documents case, and that hearing could have a huge impact on what happens next. More on that coming up.
There are several elections going on tonight, and big news on what is now the most expensive House primary in U.S. history. This was a closely watched Democratic race in New York, and NBC is projecting George Latimer has defeated incumbent Congressman Jamal Bowman. Latimer will almost certainly win the general election for the deep blue 16th district. Bowman is the first Democratic House member to lose a primary this election cycle, and the first member of the so-called squad of progressive lawmakers to be voted out. I want to bring in Maria Teresa Kumar, President and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor, and Stuart Stevens, veteran of the Mitt Romney and George W. Bush presidential campaigns. He is now at the Lincoln Project. His new book, The Conspiracy to End America, 5 Ways My Old Party is Driving Our Democracy to Autocracy, is out now. Stuart, what's your reaction to this New York race?
I actually thought it was good news. I'm a very strong pro-Israeli guy. I thought that the positions that he took were more consistent. I would have voted for him. But I think it's good. I think it's good when incumbents lose. It shows that, there's some turnover. And I considered it positive.
Maria, what do you think?
Well, I mean, one of the things that is very clear is that there is a clear ability to have debate among the Democrats in the Democratic primary. And that shows that it is a thriving democracy with that party, something that you don't see within the Republican space. I do think that one of the questions leaving that, though, is going to be the amount of money that was poured in. This is the most expensive congressional district investment in a race that we've ever seen. And so one of the things I think that you're going to see the squad talk about a lot is it time for campaign finance reform? I do think that there's going to be a lot of concerns from the progressive left of, is there going to be another attempt to take out Cori Bush, for example, in the squad, where there's going to be, again, a lot of money. If you were to ask me what my druthers were, is like I would rather have had that spent on the opponents on the Republican side than a congressional race that was surely Democratic.
Or something better than campaigns in general. But
Right.
that's for a whole nother topic.
Live pictures of New York City. The polls close in 1 hour. And shortly thereafter, we will have an answer to the most expensive congressional race in history. And this is only a primary. And that's because the Democratic Party is at war with themselves over Israel. Pro-Israel groups have spent close to $20 million to take out progressive Congressman Jamal Bowman, who doesn't like Israel, or AIPAC, which is the pro-Israel lobbying group in D.C.
We are going to show AIPAC the power of the South Bronx.
Never mind that he doesn't even represent the South Bronx, but they're going to show the power. President and partner at Meslansky & Partners, Lee Carter, is here. Kirk Bardell, a Democratic strategist, LA Times columnist, NewsNation contributor. If Bowman gets shellacked tonight, even if he loses incumbent congressman, is that going to put the White House, A, on notice, B, is it going to give them more freedom to tell the pro-Palestinian, Hamas-adjacent, whatever you call them, wing of the Democratic Party, to kiss off?
Yeah, I actually think it gives them some freedom to maneuver. They have been in this tight box, unable to really move without alienating everyone all the time. And it's created this almost paralysis where by doing nothing, they're alienating everybody. And so a loss like this from an incumbent member who has been that out front and that incendiary, I actually think that gives the White House a little bit more political cover, at least, something that they've desperately needed this entire time.
How vocal of a minority, how large is the minority on the left of this far progressive ceasefire now group? How big is it?
Well, I think you're looking at sort of like 10 to 12% of the electorate there. It's a significant portion, but it's not as huge as and as loud as they seem to be. I mean, you would think that was the whole party based on the way they're showing up at events and otherwise. But it is significant. And what's significant about it is if the Democrats don't embrace them, they might end up going to a third party, and it could have a huge impact on the election.
Or they just stay home, right? Andrew Cuomo, Jamal Bowman should pull the fire alarm again because he's going to be smoked by Latimer for New York. The message is clear. Anti-Semitism in any and all forms will not be tolerated in New York, and you can't call yourself progressive without making progress. Vote. I guess, Kurt, what is going to be the turning point in the Democratic Party if this is not it?
Oh, if this isn't it, if this doesn't wake up the, this is where Democrats be their own worst enemy, right? You have a politically unpalatable situation, incredibly unpopular when your own members goes down because of it. And if that doesn't wake you up and go, hey, this isn't good politics, no matter what you think about how this should all end in the Middle East, this is terrible politics, and all we're going to accomplish by doubling down on that is losing our own supporters and our own members in Congress, our own voice. So if this doesn't get them, then they're a lost cause.
You know, we often forget where we are in the political cycle, right? Because typically the debates happen in September before a November election.
Wait, isn't it only June?
Yeah. Please don't remind everybody.
Stretch it.
Can Joe Biden specifically tack to the center on this and have it still affect voters? Can he get back to the middle?
He can, but I don't think that he has a track record that's going to allow him to do that. I think he's been sort of painted himself into a corner, and I don't think that that is how people view him. And I think he would have to do some things outside of this that are going to make him feel to the electorate to be more of a centrist. He doesn't seem to have been.
I think the good news for the Biden world is no one's really checked in yet who's going to vote in November. Thursday,
come on, really?
Thursday night is the first time that most people who aren't political obsessors are actually going to tune in and actually figure out how they feel about what's going on. Most people have not checked in yet.
All right, 72 million people watched the last debate, 72 or 75, I can't remember, the 2020 Joe Biden-Trump. What's your over-under number?
Over.
Over?
Over.
Way over?
Over.
Are we going to get to 100 million? Is this going to be like the Super Bowl?
85.
85 million?
90.
90 million?
$1. Wait.
And 90 million, and the most the polls are going to change 2%, 3%?
I think the most will change. Exactly. The polls aren't going to move a ton based on this, but here's what's so important is that people have a lot of doubt about Joe Biden right now. He could give them benefit of the doubt if he performs well, and I think it's really most important.
Biden has more to lose.
Yeah. Big stakes. All right.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
both. Great to see you. Here's Chris.
Hello, I'm Chris Cuomo. Thank you for the company. What do you say? Let's get after it. The election season just got real. The most important presidential debate in decades is just 2 days away. And I know your screens are flooded with all these talking heads and different outlets telling you, here's the strategy, these are the tactics, this is what. Most of that is what you think it is. Noise, BS. Let me tell you a couple of things that I know, as a matter of fact. Neither of these guys are known for being coachable or for being rigorous in their preparation. So the idea that they're all banging the books the way Clinton did, that's not who they are. That's not what it's going to be. They are going to say the things you're used to them saying. The question is different. It's about how are they perceived. And that's why this debate matters specifically because of how on the right it has been so single focus. Biden is mentally gone. They set a low bar, okay? Now, also, both of these guys, no matter what anybody says to you, are not known for being good debaters. Biden was judged well relatively against Trump, but he's a different man now. And the stakes are higher for his performance. So instead of jazzing you with theoretical talk, tonight I want to look at absolutely what will impact what we hear on Thursday. And we will absolutely know more about that question tonight. Why? Because it's primary day in key states all over the country. So we're going to see what issues and attitudes are winning the day in each party. But more importantly, the who takes you to the what. Okay, for both parties, meaning what matters and what you'll hear from these candidates. Here's what I mean. On the Democrat side, okay, if you want to know like what part of that party is going to be pushing Biden, you have to watch the race that's here in New York between two Democrats going for a congressional nomination, right, for their party. It is a great test of the strength of the left fringe. One of the two candidates, Jamal Bowman, he's the guy who pulled the fire alarm to stall the stopgap vote. You remember that? He sounded another alarm within the party and without by accusing Israel of genocide. AOC has been loving him up as a member of the squad. So it is a great test for the strength of that left fringe. Are they in control? Now, the bigger question, which will be answered in a large part tonight, who's going to get to point to the primaries around the country as proof of their strength? Biden or Trump? For instance, if Trump's picks lose the primaries that they're in, Biden's going to sing that song all night long. Trumpism is over. Trumpism is over. Okay? Conversely, if you see the guy from the squad winning in New York, and in a couple of other places you see more progressive lefties winning, that is going to be very telling for what Donald Trump, at a minimum, will hold Joe Biden to account for. Who are you listening to? See what I'm saying? So let's take a look at the key races for me, 4 of them in particular. NewsNation contributor, former acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, who understands the map and the dynamics within the parties very well. And for a different vibe on this, the common man feel of what these races say about what matters in these parties. Pulitzer Prize winner, you know he's my friend, journalist Charlie LaDuff. It's good to have them both with us tonight. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. First of all, Mick Mulvaney, do you agree with my assessment that this is going to matter in terms of what we hear Thursday from these two guys?
Yeah, a little bit, Chris. I think it probably matters more on the Democrat side than on the Republican side, because what's dividing Republicans right now is Trump, right? Look at the case, a race you didn't mention, which is the Bob Good race versus McGuire in Virginia. This is the chairman of the Freedom Caucus running against an outside challenger, and Trump has come out against Good. Good is losing. He's down by about 300 votes after the original count. There's probably going to be a recount. Trump is the issue there. Kevin McCarthy was also involved in the race, but it's really Trump versus non-Trump. In the Bowman case up in New York, it's about Palestine, and that's a little bit different. If Trump loses, you're right. Biden might try to make him look weak. But regardless of the outcome of the New York case, Trump is going to be able to look at Biden and go, which side of the Palestine issue are you on again? Right. Because you've been on both sides. I see it a little bit different for both parties.
Yeah, no, good. You should. So do I. Charlie, let's go back to that the Bob Good race for a second, and then we'll talk about this one. Because Bob Good was for DeSantis, okay? And now it's about, does that price still get paid in blood at the polls in a primary? But it's offset by another equal aggravating factor, which is the guy he's running against, McGuire, is an election denier. So how do you handicap that in terms of the message it might send?
Well, who's up right now? Is it McGuire? 300? By about 300 or so? So, I mean, this has been a couple of days now, and I live in Detroit. We've been through the recounts, and it's probably going to be McGuire. So, at least up here, I want to say this, first of all, to your audience. I've been watching the news, too, and this is the type of time where I'm sick of it, the talking heads. I'm supposed to be on telling Virginia what's going on there. I don't know what's going on there, but a lot of what happens in Virginia and in White Plains, the Bronx, and Colorado mirrors what's going on here. So what I figure is McGuire wins it. You're going to have a Republican seat anyway. So by the time this is all said and done, who controls Congress? They're going to hold the seat. Now we got to look at the swing areas. That's what really matters to me and what is really mattering in Michigan and Colorado, et cetera.
Well, that is true in the general. But what this will tell us is, one, who's going to brag on Thursday night? Like, if Trump's guys, if he wins in this race, if he holds on to it, Trump is going to extend it to what we saw in other primaries and what's working around the country as strength of him. Now, to your point, Mick, this is an equal opposite point in New York. Bowman has had AOC all over him. It's an interesting gamble for her to go all in on Bowman like this in the squad. What does it mean to Joe Biden If Bowman wins, what does that enable? You had said earlier, which side of the issue are you on? I think it's more for Trump about scaring people about what a Jamal Bowman represents in terms of the kinds of policies Joe Biden will bring to the southern border and to issues of equity in society, no?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. I hadn't thought about it. You just mentioned it, and it has something to do with Michigan. If Bowman wins, it means that the anti-Israel wing of the party is stronger than everybody thinks. And the pro-Palestinian wing of the party is stronger than everybody thinks. And Biden's going to sit back and go, holy cow, I now have a problem in Michigan. Because we all know that the place where the Palestinian Americans have the largest impact on the outcome of this election in 2020, in November, is going to be in Michigan, to a lesser extent in Pennsylvania. So if Bowman wins, I think it does cause Biden some headaches in Michigan, because he might have to tack further to the left, further anti-Israel, in order to make sure he shores up that part of his base.
Yeah, Michigan, Charlie, how big a deal do you think in winning that race, in the presidential race, will be that issue?
I think, see, again, I'm from here, so I can speak plainly on that.
That's why I asked you.
It's very overstated. the Arab vote, the Dearborn vote, the Palestinian vote, the Arab vote in Michigan is less than 1%, right? People working in the auto industry, it's 15%. Even in, like Rashida Tlaib has Dearborn, but she's also got Detroit. She's got Southfield, which is a lot of conservative Jews, and then the working class white Catholics to the west. She's not popular. Bowman's not popular. He's got a better chance tonight of losing than winning. And remember this, everybody in Congress, you're less popular than colonoscopies, rickets, and gonorrhea. That's a real poll. So, Bowman, do what we told you to do and go out there and do it. We didn't tell you to go out there and dance and cease fire. 15% of Westchester County is Jewish. What do you think you're doing, dude? I think with a well-organized and well-funded campaign, which he faced, he's more likely to go down tonight than he is to win.
Well, he does have a big charisma advantage over Latimer. Interesting, Latimer has Hillary Clinton pushing for him in more of a subtle way, but it's an interesting kind of just a reflection inside that party. I can't get past the idea that anybody gave a favorable appraisal in a poll to gonorrhea. Who answers that question in the positive? Oh, gonorrhea? No, I like that. I like gonorrhea.
Compared to Congress and the media, you're damn right.
Well, I guess if you made it that way, if it's an offset, which would you rather be, gonorrhea or a congressman?
I'd rather hang out with rickets. That's right.
Rickets. I haven't heard that word in a long time. So let me ask you one other race. I like what's going on with Lauren Boebert. I think it's an interesting test of the transferability of being a Trump person. So just to remind everybody, Boebert had a tight race in 2022. Literally, it was under 1,000 votes. I think it was like right around 500 votes. So she's now running in a more conservative district, okay? And as a result, heavily favored to win, says the Wall Street Journal, who's been pretty good on this. Boebert voted in line with Trump 100% of the time. So this is a test of strength. She's the one who got kicked out of the play for vaping. The reason I say that, the reason I say the thing about Bowman pulling the alarm is because that's how people remember these guys. Otherwise, they get lost in the mix. Charlie, what matters to you about this move by Boebert to go to a more conservative district and what this means?
Well, it's interesting because I guess Aspen's tired of Beetlejuice Boebert, right? And what's more swampy than moving out of the mountains and going to the plains and trying to retain a seat? I bring it back to Michigan again. We just had redistricting. 6 Congress people, 2 Republicans, 4 Democrats, moved. It was so ridiculous, I was going to start a moving company called House Movers. And it tells you a lot when faced with it, your own neighbor doesn't like you. Your neighbor will not vote for you. I bring you back to gonorrhea, rickets, and colonoscopies. Clean the swamp. They're not doing our bidding, and that's really what is going on in America. We can't afford a hamburger. Every time you go, that's like Rip Van Winkle. It's higher and higher and higher. I can't afford it, and the border's out of control, and everybody's running around talking about Gaza, and they're talking about drain the swamp, and we don't get any
literally
of it, Chris.
A world away. Mick Mulvaney, do you foresee a bumper sticker that says Trump, better than rickets?
I'm sorry, you lost me at Trump, Are we talking about a colonoscopy now? We're doing rickets? I sort of lost track.
The power of suggestion. I was going punctuation on that.
Yeah, I did a colonoscopy last week. I've been a member of Congress. I got to tell you, being a member of Congress is better. But look, your original question was about moving. Can you move from one district to another? Yeah, people move all the time because parts of their district change. Oftentimes, their house gets drawn out of their district. That's why most people move. Boebert is different here. This harkens back to, I'll give you a name you haven't heard for a while. Dennis Kucinich tried this about 10 years ago, where he offered himself to any district that would take him. That didn't work out very well. Ben Quayle, another name you haven't heard for a while, actually moved out of his district into a safer Republican district to run against a delegation mate of his and lost. So the track record here is a little bit spotty. Boebert's a little bit different. She's not moving that far, but she didn't get thrown out of there just for vaping. I mean, the ads in this campaign have been really, really harsh.
Yeah.
She's not. I mean, she's not apple pie baseball. Chevrolet and grandma.
No, but neither is
she's
Trump.
a little bit.
Those days are over for you guys,
Hey,
at
Chris,
least for now. It is
can
not
I
the
ask
character
Mulvaney?
counts
It is, but
party
in a-
anymore.
Can I ask Mulvaney
In
a
a
question?
Republican primary in Colorado, it might. In a purple state, it might still matter.
Charlie, what's your question?
Hey, Mulvaney, isn't it true? It's true that a congressperson doesn't even have to live in the district, right?
Yeah, you have to be a resident of the state that you seek to
Right,
represent,
not the
and
district.
25
So
years old.
why
And that's
move?
It. That's correct.
Why do this charade? We had a congressperson that moved into a lobbyist condo where his lobbying firm was registered,
Right.
and he was registered to vote. It's stupid and it's insulting, and this is modern politics.
Glad you flagged it.
We have a great conversation. Why do you have districts at all? They're not required by the Constitution. You could have everybody run statewide and have the top 5 or 10 go into
Right.
Congress. This is a
I know
bunch
the
of great
answer.
conversations.
I know the answer.
Go ahead, Chris, give it to us.
What's the answer?
It's the party game. These rules are
That's
set up
correct.
for them,
That's it.
not for the rest of us. That's why I want to see it go away. Mick Mulvaney, thank you very much. Charlie LaDuff, always a pleasure. Now, I got 2 things for you that you're going to like. First of all is a little joke. Innuendo, you know the word? Another way to look at it, Italian suppository. Second thing, not as funny, but much more meaningful. We're trying something new in this break, 4 minutes and 5 seconds. Check this out. You're going to get squeezebacks, meaning that the screen is going to change. You're going to be seeing the commercial, but you will still get to check in with the show and see what we're doing in between the segments. So I'm not going away all the way, all right? And we're going to work on it, see how much of it we can get you to hear as well, because very often the spiciest TV happens in the breaks. All right, when we come back, guess who's here? Egyptian-born comedian Bassem Youssef. The Egyptian Jon Stewart. You know what? I think he's better than that. He's got tens of millions of followers because he has connected people to the reality of the Middle East. Now I want to bring it home. What does he think he's learned about America from how it's reacting to what's happening over there? Next.
Voters going to kick a squad member to the curb.
Our brother, Jamal Bowman, is under attack.
We are going to show in AIPAC the power of the motherfucking South Bronx.
We'll find out soon. Polls are about to close for squad member Jamal Bowman's New York primary.
We are here for our brother, Jamal Bowman. We want to turn out the vote. We are texting our friends. We are turning out. Vote for Jamal Bowman.
Ceasefire now, y'all. That's what we're doing. Ceasefire now. Let's get it popping. Let's get it popping. Let's change the world. It's the many versus the money. We're going to win. Let's go, baby.
We're going to win. We're going to take on AIPAC, and we're going to kick some Wall Street. So let's go.
Stop the bombs.
Polls are closing soon in New York's primary, and despite all the help Jamal Bowman received from other left-wing Democrats, he's in danger right now. Listen to this, of becoming the very first Democratic House member this cycle to lose a primary. And here's the big question. If Bowman goes tonight, could other members of the squad be in trouble as well? The same tactic being deployed against Bowman by pro-Israel groups is also now being wielded against Cori Bush, another person who may go. She still has a primary coming up. This could be an issue for Biden, too. CNN reporting that there are warning signs for Biden's Jewish support as the war in Gaza drags on and anti-Semitism rises. Multiple Jewish elected Democrats and Democratic voters told CNN about being disappointed and abandoned by progressive allies, of feeling, quote, politically homeless, both because they think Biden has not done enough and because they worry he cannot control his left. Joining us now is conservative columnist Chris Bedford. Chris, so in an hour and 40 minutes, we will start getting news as to if Jamal Bowman could be the first Democrat to lose his primary. I have two tea leaves, and I want to present them to you in sequence. The first tea leaf I have for you is early voting, is mail-in voting, and this is according to the New York Daily News. We have not independently confirmed this, but here it is. There were about 10,000 Democratic voters that had cast their ballot in Westchester County. That's good news for George Latimer, the Democrat who is more tame than Jamal Bowman. And then when you flip over to the Bronx, there were only 6,445 people who voted so far in the Democratic primary. These are very, very early vote numbers. But that is good news for George Latimer.
It is, and I think Jamal Bowman's actually in trouble. He's really the first person in the squad to actually, for the Democrats to be able to get their hooks into. It's been 6 years, essentially, of the squad bullying Democrats into taking completely untenable positions. It started to backfire. They've really worn out their welcome. But it's also worn out his welcome with his own voters. I mean, that big rally he held with AOC and Bernie Sanders, that wasn't even in his district. He's talking about the people of South Bronx telling AIPAC where to go. He doesn't represent the South Bronx. He represents maybe a little bit of the North Bronx, but largely it's places like New Rochelle and White Plains. He's north of that. So he's talking to the wrong voters. He's got and the criticism is that he's more interested in fame, that he's too anti-Israel. Well, he hasn't done anything at all to try and dissuade that. He's just doubled down, and I think he's actually in real trouble.
I think so, and you're kind of call that rally large. There were about 1,200 people there, according to AOC. But look, okay.
1/10 of what Trump gathered.
What 1/10? Great point. Here's my second piece of evidence, and you teed it up perfectly because it involves AOC. There's trouble in paradise. You just saw them jumping on the stage together. Well, this is according to the New York Post, and this happened today. AOC skipped out on the 3:30 p.m. event with Jamal Bowman, noting, quote, a shift in schedule. Ouch. And as for tonight, she's supposed to go to the watch party, right? Well, her schedule is still firming up. It's unclear if she will attend Bowman's primary night watch party in Yonkers. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it doesn't seem like AOC wants to be seen with him.
I think that makes sense. I mean, the squad was able to push a lot of ideas that were pretty foreign to even liberal Democratic politics before 2018 when they first showed up, whether it's defund the police or abolish ICE. But what really opened them up to mass criticism from some of their own constituents, especially in Bowman's case, was the October 7th attack. And seemingly, kind of clearly actually in some cases, siding with Hamas, calling the mass rapes and mass murders a hoax or at least exaggerated. Those are the sorts of things that allowed people like Hillary Clinton or former Governor Andrew Cuomo to come in and say, we don't want this person representing Democratic politics, and kind of regain the high ground. They were so afraid of the squad for so long, so cowed into submission. Now they feel like they got the moral high ground. They're hungry for it, and they're going to strike.
Yeah, and he apologized for some of that anti-Semitism, but it was conveniently during an election, of course. Chris, thank you.
And welcome to Hannity. We begin tonight with a Fox News alert. The polls, they are officially closed in the state of New York, and soon, maybe, the fire alarms on Capitol Hill, maybe they can rest easy. We are monitoring the results as they pour in, but far-left Congressman Jamal Bowman is in real jeopardy of losing his re-election bid after getting primaried by someone, well, slightly less radical. Bowman, best known for tagging along with the squad, hating Israel, pleading guilty to a misdemeanor for intentionally pulling a fire alarm inside the Capitol complex in what was an unsuccessful attempt to delay a funding bill. Now, Congressman Bowman also suggested that America deserves the border crisis we have. Why? Because of our evil capitalist ways. That's all coming up straight ahead. And this is a Fox News alert. Radical squad member Congressman Jamal Bowman has lost his primary to his Clinton-endorsed opponent, George Latimer, in a huge blow to the squad and the progressive movement, especially after they held this pretty unhinged rally in the Bronx over the weekend. Take a look.
Congressman, I want to hear South Bronx chant right now. South Bronx, South Bronx. We are going to show AIPAC the power of the mother South Bronx. And we're going to keep calling for a permanent ceasefire. Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
And another Fox News alert. Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert has won the Republican primary in that state's red 4th district tonight after she moved over from the 3rd district to replace retired Congressman Ken Buck. She apologized a lot. I think she apologized enough.
Good evening. I'm Trace Gallagher. It's 11 p.m. on the East Coast, 8 o'clock here in Los Angeles, and this is America's Late News, Fox News at Night.
We are going to show AIPAC the power of the South Bronx. Get big money out of politics. I am the hip-hop congressman. Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
Well, breaking tonight, Jamal Bowman officially heading for the fire exit. New Yorkers standing up against progressive madness and voting the liberal squad member, October 7th denier, and fire alarm puller out of office. Results on that coming up. Well, it's a bellwether race for progressive policies in New York's primaries tonight. The pro-Palestinian incumbent and proud squad member Jamal Bowman facing a Democratic primary challenge from a moderate opponent. Back live now to the senior national correspondent Kevin Corke tracking election results. Kevin.
Trace, a massive blow to the progressive wing of the New York Democratic Party as Jamal Bowman is soundly defeated in his primary. And if you weren't surprised by his loss, well, truth is you're not alone. Witness former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who adroitly noted on X, quote, Jamal Bowman should pull the fire alarm again because he's going to be smoked by Latimer for New York today. The message is clear. Anti-Semitism in any and all forms will not be tolerated in New York. And you can't call yourself a progressive without making progress. And with that, Westchester County's executive George Latimer sent Mr. Bowman packing. If you're watching earlier today, you may have thought that the far-left squad member might do fairly well, but there was this large tranche of votes in the Bronx that came in early. But once Westchester started rolling in, as you see right here, Mr. Latimer had no problem coming away with the victory, already up by nearly 20. Look at the difference, with 82% reporting almost 14,000, and that is a figure, by the way, Trace, that's likely to continue to increase. Of course, Latimer was very well funded by backers who were against Mr. Bowman, but I think the bigger question tonight is not so much why he won or if he might win. The bigger question is this a harbinger of things to come for other progressives across the Democratic Party, Trace?
Yeah, it really is. Kevin Corke live for us in D.C. again. Kevin, thank you. Let's bring in the co-author of Stolen Youth, Bethany Mandel, and former Navy SEAL who trained with Israeli Special Forces, Cameron Hamilton. Welcome to you both. Bethany, to you first. If I can, I want to put back up, Katie, that tweet or X post by former Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York. The interesting part that I thought is the middle part where he says, Bethany, the message is clear. Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in all forms, not be tolerated in New York. But the thing is, it has been tolerated, Bethany, and I wonder if you think this Jamal Bowman thing is actually a trend. Do you think this anti-Semitism thing is going to divide the Democratic Party?
I think that the Democratic Party has a choice to make. And when they have members of the squad like Jamal, like AOC, who stood behind Jamal 100%, by the way, they have to choose a future for the progressive wing of the party. Is it someone like Richie Torres, who won easily in his primary also in New York this week, today? Or do they think the future lies with anti-Semites like Jamal Bowman? They can choose if they want to win or if they want to lose. And if they want to go the way of Richie Torres, they're going to have to leave the anti-Semitism at the door and be full-throated supporters of one of our greatest allies in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
It could be the end of Jamal Fire Alarm Bowman's political career tonight. Primary elections in New York, Colorado, and Utah this evening, and a runoff in South Carolina. I'm really waiting to see what happens to Jamal Bowman, though. Logan Raddick has a quick update for us. Hey, Logan.
Rob, good evening. All eyes are on that Jamal Bowman race as voters head to the polls across the country. The big focus, of course, again on New York's 16th congressional district. That's where the embattled squad member, Democrat Congressman Jamal Bowman, who also pulled that Capitol fire alarm to delay a vote, could lose his seat to Westchester County Executive George Latimer. Latimer is backed by prominent Democrats like Hillary Clinton and former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, while Bowman is backed by far-left lawmakers like AOC and Bernie Sanders. This race, believe it or not, is now the most expensive House primary in American history. Roughly $24 million has been spent on ads. Polls in New York close at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Meanwhile, the polls are now closed in South Carolina, where a runoff is taking place in Congressional District 3 between Trump-endorsed Mark Burns and Sherry Biggs, who's endorsed by Governor McMaster. Stick with Newsmax for the latest primary election results throughout the night. Rob, back to you.
Logan, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Good evening. I'm Logan Raddick. We have primary elections happening across America tonight. The big focus is on New York's 16th congressional district, where embattled squad member, Democrat Congressman Jamal Bowman, could lose his seat to Westchester County Executive George Latimer. Latimer is backed by prominent Democrats like Hillary Clinton and former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, while Bowman is backed by far-left lawmakers like AOC and Bernie Sanders. Now, this race is now the most expensive House primary in American history. Roughly $24 million has been spent on ads. Polls in New York close at 9 p.m. Eastern. In Colorado, Lauren Boebert is the incumbent in the 3rd district, but she chose to run in District 4's GOP primary. There's also a special election in that district to fill Ken Buck's vacant seat for the end of that term. Polls close at 9 p.m. Eastern Time there, and you can stick with Newsmax throughout the night for the latest results. And primary elections are happening across America this evening. Polls are now closed in the state of New York. Results are coming in from the District 16 Democrat congressional primary. It's the most expensive primary race in American history. Westchester County Executive George Latimer currently leading far-left squad member Jamal Bowman in the latest results, but in the early results that we have here, Latimer was trailing. Those numbers continue to be updated. We'll bring you them as they come in. Latimer picked up the endorsement of Democrats like Hillary Clinton and Andrew Cuomo. Now we'll go to Colorado in the District 4 special election to fill Ken Buck's vacant seat until January. Republican Greg Lopez going up against Democrat Tricia Calvarese. Now in District 4's primary, Lauren Boebert is the incumbent for the 3rd district. She decided to run in a more favorable 4th, but she's not running in that special election. We'll have more for you coming up later tonight. And good evening. In New York's District 16 Democrat congressional primary, Newsmax projects Westchester County Executive George Latimer as the winner over squad member Democratic Congressman Jamal Bowman. The results were not even close. And it's a big rejection of the far left in that district that includes parts of New York City and Westchester County. Now, in Colorado's District 4 special election to fill Ken Buck's vacant seat until January, Newsmax projects Republican Greg Lopez as the winner there. In Colorado's District 4 primary, Newsmax projects Lauren Boebert as the winner. She'll go up against the Democrat in the November election to take over for Lopez in January. Now, polls also officially closed in Utah. Incumbent Governor Spencer Cox currently with a commanding lead in his primary, and the GOP Senate primary to replace retiring Mitt Romney. Newsmax projects John Curtis will defeat Trump-backed Trent Skaggs.